Congressman Walsh, I just want to say, do not listen to your enemies. They will try to tear you down with propaganda, all the lies, anything they can do. Stand fast. I would just like to ask about this Arab Spring. It seemed that every time the Arab League told this president to jump, he said, how high? The Arab League would go to NATO and say jump, and they would say how high. They would go to the UN and say the same thing. Then it came to, you've got to go to Libya, and you've got to bomb Gaddafi. Now, you were on the Ways and Means Committee. What is being done to prevent this president from spending us into oblivion, for one thing, but sending all these missiles to Al-Qaeda in Libya? He is arming our enemies, and he is preparing the day for when our enemies can defeat the United States. As silly as it sounds, as crazy as it sounds, he is arming our enemies to the teeth, especially Egypt, a country where the Muslim Brotherhood has sworn to destroy us. What are people in Washington doing to tell this president, stop wasting our money, stop throwing it down the rabbit hole? Anything. Can you please answer that?
Yeah. Well, you covered a lot of ground in that question. Let me try and be as responsive as I can on some of the themes, and I'll kind of interpret what I heard you say, and that is, what in the world is going on out there? And let me tell you what in the world is going on. In 2008, the country is basically of two minds, in my opinion. And we're in the midst, Joe mentioned this sort of tumultuous nature of what's going on in the United States. And I've come to describe it this way. In 2008, President Obama articulated a view of the world and overwhelmingly won election in the United States. Largely independent voters cast their confidence with him, and they said, go forth, you know, we're persuaded, and go ahead. And they gave Barack Obama the executive authority in the United States. 24 months later, that exact same demographic, if you look at the polling, the exact same demographic basically said, I want to check and balance Congress. I didn't sign up for this type of spending, this type of posture around the world, this type of health care, and all these other issues. And then ultimately, they put in place a check and balance Congress. What has largely happened, if you take a step further back and look at a 30,000-foot level, you see that with the arrival of new members of Congress, Joe is part of a class of 87, plus two more who came, ultimately the restraining influence in terms of new legislative initiatives is over, right? The White House doesn't have a legislative agenda anymore because the White House's legislative agenda is not going to move through the House, period. The White House's spending agenda is not going to move through the House. Congress, the United States Senate put President Obama's budget up for a vote last year. Every United States senator voted against it. So what has to happen, in my opinion, is that the country has to come through and say, we're going to make some changes on the Senate side, and we're going to make some changes on the executive side. Going back to my remarks earlier, the public has the ability to make a decision about what direction we go. And we would be unwise to think that the job is completed just because one house has turned conservative. The House Republicans basically right now, if you distill it down, are in a blocking minority position within Washington. It's a one-third proposition. You got the Senate controlled by the political left, basically, and you've got the White House that controls, the White House is controlled by the political left. So you've got a conservative voice in the House of Representatives, which is a restraining influence. Fred served with my predecessor, Henry Hyde, who had a great line. Henry Hyde said, there's one thing worse than gridlock. The worst thing is the greased chute of government. And we've seen the greased chute of government and what that's produced. So there is now, for the first time since the president took an oath of office in January of 2009, there is a restraining influence. There is a counter voice that's out there on all these core issues. We had a robust debate, for example, on Libya. We've had robust debates and restraining influences on spending, but the job isn't done, and the public ultimately has to sort this out. You got anything else?
Let me just briefly add to what Peter said. and I'll be much more basic with why the president won. John McCain was about 132 years old. We were sick of the war in Iraq. The economy was starting to crash, and here along came somebody totally different, and the country bought it. Peter's right. He now, clearly 3 years later, has a record. And the record at home is easy, and this is what the country responded to in 2010 when they sent us to join Peter and the rest of his colleagues in Congress. His view of America is government's going to take care of everyone. Plain and simple. We know that can't work. We know it goes against freedom. We know we shouldn't be doing it. Abroad, though, I think everything he's doing is political. Why Libya? Why not Syria? Why? There's a lot of whys in there. In what he has said and in what he's done prior to his becoming president and since, I don't think he believes in American exceptionalism. He's the first president that I can ever remember who's not Israel's friend. And so it calls into question why he engages in certain areas and not others.
There was a question back here, sir.
I have an observation and a question, and that is, as all of us have read about and heard about the Americans which were protected by the American embassy in Cairo, were supposed to go under trial, and Hillary Clinton went and threatened that if they go under trial, including Sam LaHood's son, that they would not be given the $1.5 billion for the army and the other $500 million for the civil type of benefits. Suddenly, the three judges at the last minute claimed that they were nervous about it and sensitive, and they refused to go and get the trial done. And the Americans left Cairo. How come we cannot do the same with the slaughter going on with the Coptic Christians and their churches being burnt and all the other Middle Eastern countries where Christians are persecuted, where we should not give any money till they get their act together?
That's a question.
Yeah, happy to respond. So I think I met with Sam LaHood earlier this week and had the chance to sit down with him and get debriefed on what was happening, and asked specifically, he's a staff member or the staff director for the International Republican Institute, and we, along with Joe and others, intervened with the State Department. That's not to say that we were the ones that got it done by any stretch of the imagination, but there was a concerted effort all the way around. But it's the perfect example of the crystallization of an issue that caught the public's attention, right? And so it was a story that articulated itself. Nobody here drove that story, right? There was a voice there that was organic. Sam is the son of a member of the president's cabinet. Now, if you're a nation in the Middle East and you choose to take captive, basically, the son of a Middle Eastern, the son of a cabinet member, there's going to be a consequence to that. But think about all of the adventure and all of the conversation and all of the negotiation and all of the transition that began and brought that ultimately to fruition. But I think what is ultimately happening is there are now appropriators that are beginning to say, we need to be much more proactive on these aid questions. We ought not to be complicit in this. There is a role for the United States to play as it relates to military and other sorts of assistance. It's clearly not as easy as snapping a finger and saying you won't do this, because the power is much more diffuse in these countries, as you know. But I think that we have an opportunity to build on this experience and ultimately to try and create an environment where good behavior gets rewarded in a sense, and there's a consequence to bad behavior. Because look, in a season of downward economic pressure, when the federal government is borrowing 40 cents on the dollar, it is not an absurd question to say, well, why are we borrowing money in order to help folks that are being complicit in things that we don't ultimately support? And those sorts, what I'm saying is, in a season of budget challenges, there's an opportunity to reframe and recast some of these debates. So I had conversations with some of the folks who were intervening on behalf of the Egyptian government, kind of transition figures, the Egyptian lobbyist team. And I said, look, I'm a guy who is talking to a lot of members of Congress all the time, counting votes on a lot of different things. And let me just say this, you're sure not making an Egyptian aid package any easier. And they got the joke. So I think that there's a way to build on this to ultimately highlight what's been happening in other areas around the world. And look, there's some things that are going on. When you've got Newsweek that puts on the cover within the past several weeks, the global war on Christians, there's something that's happening in terms of an awareness, and that's what we need to build on.
Congressman Walsh, did you want to? Okay. Paul, did you want to say anything?
Just briefly, because I'll need to be going soon. Just to add to that, there is two things. One is, in Middle Eastern politics, it's nice if you have friends, but it won't get you anywhere. It was an English guy who said, Her Majesty's government has no permanent friends, she only has permanent interests. That may not be true everywhere, but by and large it's true in the Middle East. So the idea that if you're nice to people, that you will get something in return. The administration seems to have a policy that if you apologize and you're nice, and things will happen. Well, people will just take that and say, oh, okay, they're weak, and then go for more. And so I worry about the style there. So one needs to be much more pugnacious in dealing with Egypt. And I'd certainly put that aid package under threat. I think it was several years ago with Frank Wolf, I'm not sure of the technicalities, dealing with the State Department appropriations and then US aid with the amount going to Egypt. They simply added a paragraph in the legislation expressing concern about Coptic Christians. And they had the Egyptian ambassador on the phone within 5 minutes. There was no threat to cut it off. You just put that note in the bill. So with Egypt, I think that needs to be raised. The situation is in flux, and right now they really don't care what we think.
There was a gentleman over here.
Good afternoon. My name is Dorothy Yelda. I'm representing a group of our refugee students here at our high school. I belong to District 219 High School. And thanks to Juliana Taimurazi and Joseph Tamaris to invite my students here, and I think it was a blessing to have them. My question is to the panel. If we can just a little bit focus on these refugees kids here in the United States. Yes, we brought them here to this country, and we gave them this safe haven, and they are at our schools, and our communities are trying to help, and our district is trying to help them as far as education is concerned. My worry about these kids and their parents, because I'm very much involved with their parents here in Chicago, in suburbs. I'm the only Assyrian person who represents these kids at our school, and we have another person in the Niles North High School. You have no idea what their parents are going through, because we live it every day. And then when these beautiful kids come here, and for your information, they were in Jordan and Syria for years and years, not even a word of English. They came here, we started them from scratch. And by the way, they're honor roll students, and some of them are juniors and seniors. The worry is when they're ready to go to college, who would help these kids to go to college and be good, great American citizens, educated American citizens? As a matter of fact, we have 5 of them. They were supposed to be with us today. They couldn't because they're working to support a family of 8, if not 10 individuals in one family. And trust me, I'm not exaggerating by saying it is a problem for these people here. It is a big problem. I'm not saying we should not focus on the Assyrians or any other nationality back wherever they belong to Egypt, to Iraq, to wherever. But our problem is here. We have them here. How could we help them to survive, whether it's them or their families? Mainly them. My worry is about them because I see for the last 7 years I've been with this district, majority of my Assyrian kids, they don't go to college because they have to support a family. They learn to speak a little bit of English to support a family, working anywhere, begging everybody. As a matter of fact, this place here, the owner, is so nice to really employ 6, 7 of our kids on the weekends. So is there any way, I truly, from the bottom of my heart, plead everyone to think about our kids here, and then let's think about whoever is out there. Because they're here, they're safe, let's make them feel as blessed as we are to be in this country. I myself am Assyrian. I came here 35 years ago. And I'm very blessed, and I thank my Lord every single day that I'm here, I'm safe. But I cannot ignore the idea that I see this happening every day with other kids. Thank you very much for being great listeners.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Paul Marshall has to depart, right?
Sorry, just one note. This isn't precisely on the question, though it focuses on here. Just to throw this out generally, most of the people who live in the United States of Middle Eastern background are Christian. That ratio is changing, but still a majority. To which you could add Yazidis, Mandaeans, and other groups. But you don't hear much of a united political voice. I don't think it has to be united as in one. I mean, people live in different states. They come from different countries. There's also all sorts of divisions and difficulties. But politically, it should be possible for Christian Middle Easterners, if I can use that term, to have a sort of larger presence in the public space that people are aware of them in statements. At the moment, it's drowned out. So let me just, I know it's difficult, but let me just throw that out as a challenge.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Let me, if I could, exercise the prerogative of the chair and put a question to the 2 members that has been sticking in my mind as I've listened to many of you talk. And that is the whole question of refugee status and, if you will, immigration. We heard this morning how difficult it is for an Egyptian Copt to even get through the American embassy to get into this country. At the same time, we are literally lifting bunches of Muslims from Somali and bringing them to this country and dropping them down in places like the Twin Cities and Shelbyville, Tennessee, where many of them go back to become trained by al-Shabaab. I just would like to get a sense from our 2 colleagues here about whether or not we need to go back to what we had in 1957 when we had the Immigration and Nationality Act, which was designed to help people who were fleeing from then communist countries. But also, and this is a quote from that statute that says, from any country within the general area of the Middle East and who cannot return to such an area or to such a country on account of race, religion, or political opinion. Now, I realize immigration is a terribly volatile issue and a terribly volatile campaign year, but do we need to rethink who some of the people are who really need asylum in this country, who for one reason or another cannot get it? So I just ask that of both Peter and Joe.
Well, let me do 2 quick touch points, and then I'll give you a straight answer. First of all, in terms of the students that are here today, so good news, bad news, right? Good news is they're in the United States of America, which is a great place to be. Further good news is Joe Walsh's office and my office will do everything we can from a casework point of view, within the law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to try and be helpful. And Kitty Weiner, who is waving right over there, is happy to try and accommodate that. I don't know, then another, I know Paul already left, but if you've not read his piece in the Imprimis, Hillsdale College's monthly newsletter, it's called Blasphemy and Free Speech, and it's this month. It's outstanding. So I sat down and gave him a little shout out. But it's very, very good, well thought out. So I don't know, Fred, about the 1957 Act in particular, and of course I take at face value your description of it, and I would say this: yes, there's no question that the United States needs to rethink its basic mission and how it articulates that around the world, and particularly as it relates to those to whom invitations are extended. And there are some voices in the United States that are unwilling to further deal with any substantive thing as it relates to immigration, because they say, if we let this little pressure point out, we won't get the, quote, comprehensive approach. It's a very cynical way of governing, and it doesn't get to where there is likely a great deal of consensus. But in answer to your question, yes. I mean, Elizabeth and I are acquainted with some refugee situations where you're kind of listening through, and it's not that refugee that is being described here. You know what I mean? And it's incongruous with that 1957 statute statement.
And I would only add, you're right. Look, part of what we have to do in this world now that we're living, we need to be a beacon. So we need to be a place for people to come to. So yes, we need to provide we need to provide asylum. We need to be a refuge for folks. We need to turn our lights on and let everyone know who needs to escape that they can come here. We need to, in this country, make the process of legal immigration much easier. Much easier.
This gentleman's been waiting to offer a question. Stand up, sir. It's your turn.
Good afternoon. My name is Luke, and Congressman Walsh. I've seen you on TV, and Peter. It's nice to meet you in person. My question, I was glancing through this book written by Paul. He mentioned about OIC. I know before a doctor can cure a disease, he will know the cause of the disease. I want to ask you, Congressman, OIC, which stands for Organization of Islamic Countries, what role have they played that have changed over the centuries the course of America? Can you specifically tell us how many countries today can be classified as Christian countries? If we know them, why haven't we encouraged those countries to form Christian countries so that they can influence some of these things that are happening? If a child will go and shoot, probably his father is encouraging him. Organization of Islamic countries have understood that getting anything through West, you have to lobby. And I believe what is happening now did not just start 1 year or 2 years ago. They formed this organization, and they have used it very effectively. But I believe with both of you, from what I've heard, if you understand the cause of these problems, encourage those countries that are Christians, which I don't even know how many they are, to form such an alliance. I think we can still make a difference, because America alone cannot fight this. You need the coalition of people who are outside here to help.
Today, 2 questions specifically that I want to ask. One, I'm finding, I think that both of you, as well as the panelists, brought up some very pertinent issues with regards to information that we do not know what's going on in our own country. I find that, in fact, very greatly in the African-American community, where there's a lack of knowledge and information about some specific things where people are moving on culture and not based on knowledge. First question is, strategically, how would you recommend bringing more information and awareness to things that can, in fact, bring forth change in our nation with regards to things that are going on here? Second question is, from a grassroots level, how can we begin to implement some of the issues that have been presented to us today, that all of us can give stories that are dear to our heart in various countries, but we have to be a people of activation, and we have to do it in a way that implements strategy and change. And so what I'm asking for is some top-level positions and strategies that we can leave here and use from your perspective that will bring forth change in this country and really make an impact in the political realm.
All right, you ready for an answer? You ready? Can you handle it? All right. You got a pen out? Stand up. I don't mean to see this condescendingly, but just so I can see it. I think you got to do two things. The first is you've got to energize the church in the United States, and I would do it this way. I would do it through biblical teaching, through the teaching of the Word, and ultimately to go to that scripture, I was in prison and you visited me. And listen, there's brilliant theologians, there's brilliant teachers, but you can see different sorts of waves, right, that have come through, and the Christian church has become robust. And when it chooses to speak with one voice, it's an incredible voice, isn't it? When the Christian church began to speak out in, going back to Wilberforce and the abolition movement, going to the civil rights movement, taking a very active role in AIDS, taking a very active role in trafficking, all of these things, what happens? All of a sudden, they get on the radar screen, and what happens? Policymakers respond. Okay, that's the first thing to do. So figure out a way to get biblical teaching to ultimately animate up this notion of speaking out on behalf of brothers and sisters who are held in prison. That's the first thing to do. And it's not complicated, but it is, it's got to be done with some finesse and some skill and ultimately a marketing program, if I could be so bold, but that's the way I would do it. The second thing is this. This group has to multiply about a jillion times. Joe and I attended a conference last week in Washington, which the supporters of Israel put on. And they brought in 15,000 people for a 3-day conference. Really well organized, so well organized, the Prime Minister of Israel comes in for it. It is a big, big, big deal. Now, 15,000 people is a lot of people, but more people go to a Bears game, right? It's not, it's big, but it's not that big, and it got everybody's attention, and it's a well-organized group, and, very effective, but they're able to gather people in ways that are effective. And I would think to begin to strategize, how do you move from 200 people, which is significant on a beautiful Saturday, to 1,000 people in Chicago meeting in 6 months, or whatever it happens to be, but take some incremental goals, partnering with big churches in the area, and to begin to lay this out that says, look, we've got an opportunity here to really blow this thing open and make some changes, but we got to put some points on the board rather than, sitting at home watching TV. It's not that complicated, but it does take a lot of work. Joe.
And I will just add quickly, this isn't hard. What we do politically in this country, this election in the next couple of years, is going to determine the way this country looks like for the next 100. This is all now about politics. We're right. People who disagree with freedom-loving American people, they're not right. We're right. Now it's all about politics. Find like-minded people, get political, and grow. And everybody, Peter and I aren't going to lead this thing. Your president, unless I misheard him, your president told everybody in this room a month ago, I don't care about the first words in the First Amendment to the Constitution. Now, if that doesn't get you fired up, we're done. Yes. We're done.